My name is Brooke Muller. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Architecture, and I want to thank a number of folks for making this lecture and a panel that's happening later this afternoon possible. So Robert Crumbine and Clint Mullis from the Charlotte Center City Partners, John Searby, Ryan Carter, and Brandon Jones with Catawba Riverkeeper, and then Blaine Brownell, Jonathan Desi Olive, and Thomas Forget, who are all with the David R. Ravin School of Architecture. And then I will give credit to the glue who made this all stick together, which is Meg Whalen, Director of Communications and External Relations in the College of Arts and Architecture. So Courtney Crosson and I met at the Society of Building Science Educators retreat at the PG&E Center in San Francisco in 2016. And given our shared interest in relationships between water, urban and architectural planning, design, and design education, we have maintained a close correspondence ever since. And so it's truly a delight that Courtney is with us to take part in Charlotte Shout, the Beckler Modern Film Series, and this School of Architecture lecture series. So allow me briefly to explain the events that will follow before we turn to the lecture. Following this conversation, is that better? Yes. Okay. Following this lecture, excuse me, there will be some refreshments. And then at 2:30, a net positive watershed development in the City of Creeks conversation that will take place in Dubois room 904. And so Courtney and I will speak very briefly at that, but we will kick things off with Brandon Jones sharing Catawba Riverkeeper's State of the Water report. So our discussion will center on the question of what are the implications for design and development in urban environmental futures when we give greater credence to water and the state of our urban waters as Charlotte continues to grow. And these trajectories need not be in conflict, and it just requires a little planning and foresight, maybe more than a little. So then tomorrow night, and this is all part of Charlotte Shout, by the way, at 7, the film Psychohydrography, yes, will be shown as part of the Beckler Modernism and Film Series. And I should note that the cash bar opens at 6:30. Make note of that. And the film follows the journey of the LA River and explores through the lens of water our simultaneous dependence on and alienation from the natural world. Following the film, about an hour in length, my colleague Thomas Forget will lead a panel, which will also involve Courtney and myself, as well as John Searby, who's the executive director of Catawba Riverkeepers. So just to plug, I hope to see you there tomorrow evening. And now, Courtney Crosson is a licensed architect, associate professor, and director of the Drockman Institute at the University of Arizona, where she teaches classes on water in the built environment and community outreach studios. Her current research advances decentralized water systems to address pressing problems facing cities, whether water scarcity in the US Southwest or safe and affordable water access in informal settlements in Nairobi, Kenya. She is the principal investigator on a 4-year NSF grant to investigate how to transition cities in the US Southwest to net zero urban water futures. Her work has been published in peer-reviewed journals in architecture, engineering, and planning. And she's also won numerous awards for her teaching and outreach and research. Very interesting professional background as well. She's worked for Bureau Happold in LA, Foster and Partners in Hong Kong. Is it MUF? Architecture and Art in London, Multiplicity in Milan, and the UN Habitat in a Nairobi informal settlement named Kibera. At Bureau Happold, she was the sustainability consultant for the Net Zero Energy Division of the new LA County Museum of Art by Peter Zumthor, University of California, Santa Barbara's Institute for Energy Efficiency by Kieran Timberlake, and the Net Zero Water and Energy Design of the new Santa Monica City Hall extension by Frederick Fisher Architects. She has guided energy and water reduction frameworks at Rice University, LA Union Station, and UC San Diego. Crosson's first net zero design has been in operation since 2009, a 7-acre secondary girls boarding school in Uhuru Bay, Kenya, for which she was the project manager and lead designer. So we are honored to have Courtney with us today. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Okay, yes, you all can hear me. So I just turned on my microphone. Thank you so much, Brooke, for that kind introduction and comprehensive introduction. And it's wonderful to be with you all today. I'm going to be talking about the Southwest, which is where I currently live. But North Carolina, I went to undergraduate in North Carolina. So this state and this area has a really special place in my heart. And it's great to be back here. And so honored to be invited, Brooke and Blaine. Thank you so much. And yeah, I've been a fan of Brooke's work for a long time, since 2016 when we connected. It's always wonderful to find other people are interested in the same kinds of questions you're interested in, and looking at it from lots of different lenses. So thank you. So like you were introduced to my background, I am an architect. And architects have envisioned desert cities as oases, full of sunshine, burgeoning economies, and construction over seemingly endless desertscape. But for the last century, this mirage has been enabled by imported water. And so the first slide you saw was my home of Tucson, Arizona, in the beautiful Sonoran Desert. And what you see now is the Central Arizona Project, which imports water from the Colorado River over 300 miles to Tucson. And many cities survive on the Colorado River. In fact, 40 million people rely on the Colorado River for their daily water supply. However, we're in the largest mega drought in over a millennium. At the end of last year, the US Bureau of Reclamation told the 7 states that are relying on the Colorado River that we actually need to cut supplies, cut demand on the Colorado River by 40% in order to maintain a self-sustaining supply. And that is a lot of water. That's a very significant undertaking. And it's a big paradigm shift and a big question for the cities that rely on the Colorado River and those 40 million people, how we're going to do this. And those cities are places like Tucson, Phoenix, Los Angeles, San Diego, Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, Denver. So you get the picture. It's a lot of people in a lot of cities, and a lot of political will that's needed to change. And so the question is, can we have water self-sufficient cities in the US Southwest? Can we get off of imported water? And can the Colorado River have a self-sustaining supply itself? I'm here to tell you, yes, I believe we can have water self-sufficient cities in the Southwest. And I'm going to tell you about the paradigm shifts necessary in our urban water systems to accomplish this. Before I dive into that, I'm going to tell you about 2 different projects that Brooke so kindly mentioned in the introduction. And these projects illustrate to you sort of how I got involved in this work and why I believe in net zero urban water, and why, as an architect, I think it's really important that we are involved in this transition, and we're really necessary for this transition in our urban environment. So behind you, you see a picture of a secondary school in Uhuru Bay, Kenya, and it's on the banks of Lake Victoria. You can see Lake Victoria in the background in the sunset. It's on 7 acres of land. And then you can see a couple photos of me at 25. I keep these photos in my office at university because I like to remind myself of what it is to be a 25-year-old and really idealistic and excited as a young architect. But this is really my first project as a designer. I was the project manager and designer for this school. But what's interesting about this project, it is net zero water. But when I got this piece of land, it was just 7 acres. There was no infrastructure in a traditional sense. So there's no piped water supply coming in from a water treatment plant. There was no sewer system taking wastewater off the site. There were no electrical lines feeding energy into the building. So as a designer starting out my career, I really had to think about resources, how we get resources to our built environment and how we work with natural systems to sustain those resources, right? For the good of everyone involved in that project. So this is another project, Santa Monica City Services Building, built about a decade after that secondary girls' school. And it is also net zero water. It does have that infrastructure, but it's interesting because that infrastructure was really a difficulty in getting it to net zero water. We had to work through a lot of permitting. And when you're shifting paradigms and trying to do new things, it can be a real uphill battle and take a lot of time. But what's cool about this building is that it is in downtown Santa Monica. It's right next to the city hall, so it's the extension, and it's where architects, anyone building a project in the city, goes to get their project permitted, so they can use the composting toilets. They're drinking the rainwater, as they're getting their project permitted throughout the city. It's also net zero energy as well. So two very different projects, but both accomplishing this goal of being self-sustaining with water. So now I am leading a team over the next 4 years, sponsored by funded by the National Science Foundation. And we're looking at how we transition our cities in the US Southwest to be net zero urban water. And it's with other institutions, with University of California, Los Angeles, with Colorado State University, Colorado School of Mines, University of New Mexico, and then housed at the University of Arizona under my leadership. And it's looking at Albuquerque, Denver, Los Angeles, Tucson. We're working closely with the water utilities. And it's interesting because these cities, yes, we're all geographically in the US Southwest and all rely on the Colorado River, but of varying sizes, very different political systems, different natural system contexts. So it's been an interesting challenge. We just finished our first year, so we have 3 more years to go. So stay tuned for the results of that work. But there's a lot of excitement, I think, in the US Southwest right now to move us, to answer these questions because of the constraints on our assumed imported water that's now being emitted. And I also want to point out this project. I'm an architect. It's interesting that it's funded through the Hydrology Directorate of the National Science Foundation. And so as people in the built environment or students, architecture students listening to this presentation, I want to emphasize that we are welcome at the table. And I do think a broad base of people recognize, hydrologists recognize they want to work with us and they need to work with us in the built environment to answer these kinds of questions. So today I'm going to talk to you about the 4 paradigm shifts needed to transition to net zero urban water. So the first paradigm shift, average and extremes. So I'm going to tell you about this first by telling you a little bit more about the Sonoran Desert, where Tucson is located. And what you see behind you is our monsoon season. It's this beautiful monsoon cloud. You see it coming off in the distance like that, just this funnel of rain that descends on the city. It's amazing. It's spectacular. But if you've lived in Tucson a long time, you know that our monsoon season is changing. So Tucson gets about a foot of rainfall per year. We have a winter rain, and then we have our monsoon season in the late summer. And it's changing in 2 different ways. One, it's shifting. So our monsoon season has often been occurring later and for like a shorter duration, for just a couple of months instead of 4 months, for example. And it's also changing in terms of intensity. So we're getting little rain for some monsoon seasons, and then we're getting a lot of rain for other monsoon seasons each year. So annually, it's fluctuating a lot, where it used to be a pretty consistent condition, and like clockwork, it used to occur. So another example underlining this point. Okay. is Sacramento, California. You see behind me. And this is in January of this year. It's after an atmospheric river. And they had another atmospheric river, I believe, in March. And so what's interesting is this is a place that's technically in a drought, and yet events like this can happen, right, to the community. And so, again, these extreme events happening in our cities. I bring this all up because as designers, in the past, we've been used to designing for like a fixed design parameter, like an average condition. And so we approach things like, like water system design with a fixed parameter. But really what's happening is we have more extreme events to take into account. And I'm going to show you another map and then talk to you a little bit more about how this applies to our urban water system directly. So in the map behind you, you see this is from 2017 from research published in Science. And there's a lot of different articles like this out there. And it's basically showing you projected effects underneath climate change in a few decades from now. And what's interesting here is I think a lot of times when we talk about climate change, especially as designers, we treat it like it's going to have one universal effect across all of the places we design. But these maps and this research really show you that actually the effects are positive and negative, and really there's a lot of variation. And so the top left maps shows you agricultural yields, for example. So yes, in a lot of places, agricultural yields are going to go down, but in other places, they're going to go up. You also see other things like mortality up here. Some places, higher mortality, some places it actually lowers it. Energy expenditures, the same thing. And so as designers, we can't think about climate change and these changes in our natural systems just in sort of a universal sense. It really needs to be place specific. And so here, in the past, I think we've really thought about it, resilience in terms of engineering resilience. So we have this fixed design parameter, like I described, and maybe the system swings a little bit out of that fixed design parameter, but the state of equilibrium is always the same. But how I described to you Tucson or monsoon season or what's happening in Sacramento, what's happening is really we need to design for ecological resilience, which means that state of equilibrium might be changing over time as those conditions swing and change over time. And so the system needs to have what we call adaptive capacity to adapt to and change to new states of equilibrium to be resilient. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this relates specifically to the urban water system. And talking about the urban water system, I like to think about it in terms of natural systems, social systems, and then the built systems that all come together. And so natural systems, you can think about that in terms of the supply to the urban water system. That's where our water is coming from. The social system, you can think about it in terms of the demand. So the people that need the water. And then here we are in the built environment as an architect in the built systems. And what's interesting here is that our social systems and our natural systems are changing over time, right? And the role of the built environment, the built system, is to create that adaptive capacity between those changes of that inner and outer ring, between that supply and demand. And so in terms of natural systems, I'm talking about chronic stressors like climate change, or acute shocks that are more like natural disasters. In social systems, the chronic stressors are things like population growth, economic growth, and acute shocks, things like regulatory changes, code changes, right? So that's really our role, this adaptive capacity. Okay, so paradigm shift number 2, centralized and decentralized. So what you see behind you is sort of how most people experience water, right? At least in the United States. We turn on the water tap, we expect water to flow out, be able to wash our hands. And that's really the end of our interaction. The pipes are hidden underground. We don't think about, the waste or the water treatment plant that's sitting outside the city to treat it. We don't think about, in Tucson, where that water has come from over 300 miles to reach us and all the embodied energy in that water. We're just sort of expecting it to be there, right? But it's really important as we realize that we need to make some dramatic changes, at least in the Southwest, how we relate to water and how we use water to make those connections, right? And so in the centralized system, basically water is treated on the outside of a city, and then it's distributed through pipes throughout the city. Then anything that goes down the drain or flushed in the toilet goes off to a wastewater treatment plant, right? So all the water's at a potable water quality, and it's really just one single type of water. But there are many types of water. And so this is part of a concept that's called One Water, that a lot of water municipalities, like right on cue, the music, underlining my point. Yeah, so many different water utilities across the United States are talking about this, right? In terms of this one water idea, that as water utilities, no longer is it just being responsible for potable water, but we need to recognize all the different kinds of water: rainwater, gray water, stormwater, reclaimed water, across our urban water system, and integrate and use those kinds of water. And so that's where the decentralized point comes in. We have our centralized system, and we have it for good reason. Public health, it's really important to be able to have a secure water supply that we know is going to keep us alive. But there are ways to integrate these other forms of water into our water system, especially when you think about fit for purpose water. So not everything needs to be to a potable water standard. You can, for example, with toilet flushing, the shower water quality is, with light treatment is more than adequate to flush your toilet, right? So making those connections is really important. I'm going to tell you about a research project that I did with some physical geographers and a couple PhD students in geography, looking at, it's really a thought project, looking at how you integrate something like rainwater across a city like Tucson that has an existing centralized system, and asked really what is the capacity for that rainwater to make an impact in our urban water system. And so when I moved to Tucson, something I heard a lot, and I still hear, is this fun fact that people like to say, which is by volume, more rain falls on Tucson than we actually use. So, which kind of blows people's mind, because they think about, it being a very water scarce environment. But the question here is then, how do we harness that rainfall to ecological benefit and to the benefit of our city and water system? So when you do the math, it's about 144%, so more rainfall, right, than we use on an annual basis. And then when you look at the imported water, that Colorado River water, right, it's about 430% of that Colorado River water. So over 4 times the amount of rainfall as we're actually taking in from the Colorado River, yet we're not harnessing that rainfall really to use in our urban water system. I'm going to tell you why it's a much more complicated story than that. And so first, to illustrate this, 2 different maps. This is the city of Tucson, you see, and one map is showing annual, and one map is showing our month of June, which you can get the feeling from that picture that it's red hot. That's our hottest month. But first, with the annual map, what we've done here is broken Tucson into 1 mile by 1 mile township squares, roughly following our transportation grid. And we have taken the amount of rain falling on that square mile and subtracted it from the amount of demand in that square mile. And so when you see green, that means great. You have more rainfall than you have demand. But in red, that means the demand is higher than the rainfall. So despite the 144% or the 430%, there are still some areas that that the demand is actually higher than the amount of rain falling there for lots of reasons. The demand's higher, population density, or there's a big municipal city park there, land, there's affluence, and so larger gardens and things like that. So it's not demand is not the same across the city. And then on the point on June is that we also have irregularity in terms of the amount of water that we get in that rainfall. That rainfall is not, falling like clockwork every day. It's actually, in these extremes, as I described, a winter rain and the summer monsoon season. And so June is the month right before our monsoon season. And so you can basically see almost every township square, every square mile has a higher demand than the amount of rainfall, because we get very little, except for some green areas that I think that's when the monsoon came a little bit early and there's not a lot of population in those areas. So those are 2 points. And then we also have infrastructure limitations to integrating a rainwater system into our urban water system. So when I talk about rainwater systems to my students, I like to talk about it in terms of catchment, conveyance, and storage, those 3 components. And so on the top, you can think about this in sort of a broader, wider scale. You have the watershed that's catching the water, rivers conveying the water, and then you have reservoirs and lakes or aquifer that's storing the water. Now, much smaller scale, you can think about this in terms of our wonderful saguaro cacti in Tucson. And so it has that big root system. That's a big net that's capturing the water, veins that's conveying the water, and then the tissue that's storing the water. And in the case of a saguaro, you have that tissue, it's accordion structure that's expanding, right? They're big, fat, happy cacti after monsoon rain. And then that June, that really red hot month, they're a lot more narrow, right? In that tissue, don't have as much water in them. So in the built environment, we have roofs capturing the water, pipes and cisterns. And those two, the roofs are a limiting factor because we can only capture as much rainwater as we have roof area. So all that water falling on Tucson, we're not necessarily gonna be able to capture that. And then the other limiting factor is the cistern, right? Our storage that helps us get through those really, those long periods of dryness is really important in Tucson. And so what we did was ask to be net zero urban water, meaning replace our Colorado River allotment that imported water with rainwater. What kind of storage size do we need per household in Tucson? And we used the last 10 years of rainfall and daily rainfall. I'm saying this because of the last paradigm shift point about average and extremes. We didn't average 10 years of data and then run the system through that. We actually, we had to keep those extremes in there, right? So it was 10 years of during mega drought and solving for the size, the cistern size necessary in order to reach net zero urban water. So what we found out was on average, each household would need about 10,000 gallons of storage, which is about the size of a swimming pool, to be able to replace imported water with rainwater. And again, this is sort of a thought experiment to recognize and to understand the kind of infrastructure investment that would be necessary to integrate rainwater to this extent. Tucson does have a rainwater rebate program through Tucson Water, through our utility. And so what you see on the map is those different purples are different sizes of cisterns that are needed. Again, on average, it's about the size of a swimming pool. But the little dots that you see are where there are currently rainwater systems at the household level. And we know that because these are the rebate adopters, and then we know their size of the cistern that they have. And so the green dots that you see are rainwater systems that comply with the model of being net zero urban water, of contributing to that. So the point here is that it is possible, those green dots are already contributing to this kind of vision going forward. Okay, so paradigm shift number 3, siloed and collaborative. And this is a point that we see happening across many different industries, moving to a collaborative model. And it's really important for architects. It's important in our broader urban water system discussion. So there are, a few dozen certified net zero water case studies across the United States and the world. These are pictures of 10 different of those case studies. And what you can see consistently across these projects is that the team collaborated very early. Sometimes as architects, we get a project and we sort of draw our building perimeter and really focus on that project, and then only later think about the landscape and integrating that. But to have a water system that's working both with those natural and social systems and really recognizing that adaptive capacity responsibility of the built environment, we have to collaborate early, and we need to collaborate with lots of different people to give us good inputs into, what are the possibilities and requirements for that kind of water system for both inside the building and outside the building. So I have two quick examples of this. One, this is our College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture. You can see the building is behind that vine screen wall. That screen wall is facing south. So in Tucson, we like to mediate the south sun. It's really hot. And then interestingly, through that building, it has a rainwater cistern from the bottom, the base of the building. You can see it in the shop on the first floor, all the way to the top of the building. So it's a big cistern that was integrated into the building design. And then that pipe that you see coming out, there's some water coming out of that pipe is the rainwater. And it's created this beautiful riparian habitat that people around campus love. This is usually cited as people's favorite spot on campus, and it's because of the water. It's because it's, a sanctuary and it's unique, and it's because of design, about the architect really thinking about and collaborating across disciplines to figure out how to harness this rainwater to create this beautiful outdoor environment. I'll just make another quick point on this design since I have architecture students listening. So that concrete outlined pit is actually green infrastructure as well. So like I said, we have these monsoon events that are these huge peak events, right? So we get a lot of rain all of a sudden. And so our green infrastructure in Tucson is really about creating a capacity to take in that water, but just for a few days a year. And so we look at this green infrastructure in terms of multi-purpose. So during monsoon seasons, after a big monsoon rain event, that amphitheater area fills with water, right? And it's unusable for a few days, but it's completely usable most of the rest of the year. So it's this wonderful design as well. Okay, here's the Bullitt Center. So this is another net zero water building with a lot of collaboration needed. It is 7 stories. It's a Class A office building, and it has composting toilets throughout and on each level. It also, the green that you see on the street is fed by gray water. And so this project also, in order to have those integrated water systems, needed a lot of collaboration with different disciplines and early on to accomplish this in downtown Seattle. Okay, so 4th paradigm shift. This one's really important: technological innovation and social innovation. And so I think when we look at these big grand challenges, like how to get US Southwest cities to net zero urban water, often we think, oh, well, technology will save us. If we just have the right technology, solutions, that will take care of it, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that we've had the right technology for decades to get us to net zero water buildings, to get us to net zero water cities, but social innovation is really lagging behind. And that's the big factor, both public perception, so the wider public's willingness to adopt new technology, and again, how they interface with the water system and their expectations around the water system, but also code and regulation lags far behind that technological innovation. And I want to say with good reason, right? Again, going to that public health point and environmental health point, water does need to be, carefully regulated to keep us alive and keep our environmental systems alive as well. But I think there's different ways that we can approach regulation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I think, one way to frame this from the beginning is a lot of our codes are prescriptive, which means, again, to this point about fixed parameter, they're pointing to a criteria that we have to meet and what it's going to look like and how it's going to perform and in a fixed way. But we can also have performance-based code, meaning we can outline the performance standard, and we could even change that performance standard over time and really be responding to that adaptive capacity in the built environment. So, okay, so this is one example. This is pulling out part of a net zero water system. And that bullseye that you see is where there is innovation needed, or it's a permitting block, or basically the architect designer of the system needs to do a lot of work, and they're not even guaranteed success to be able to move through the permitting of the system. And in this example, it's rainwater to potable water use. It's important to point out here, I'm talking about public water systems, right, under the Safe Drinking Water Act. If you're a homeowner and you want to use rainwater to potable, you can do that because you're carrying your own liability, right, for you surviving the system that you designed. But for public water systems, for commercial buildings, it's really difficult. So those examples I was showing you of Santa Monica City Services Building or the Bullitt Center, they had to go through all of these bullseyes to try to get those systems through a really difficult permitting process. So there's basically 3 systems, part of net zero water building that are required to achieve that self-sustaining balance. And this is a diagram of one such net zero water building, and those 3 systems pulled out. So system 1 is drinking water. The building needs to supply drinking water. System 2 is recycled water, and system 3 is wastewater. And I'm going to walk you through a few different code changes that are needed to support streamlining the process of being able to permit a net zero water building. So first, that drinking water system. So what you see on the left over here is a typical water treatment plant as we know it, right? So that's the typical centralized system. Then on the right is rainwater to potable system. And so in net zero water buildings, you need either usually rainwater or you need a sustainable well. But rainwater to potable is again, like I said, really difficult to permit for lots of different reasons. And some of the innovations that are needed is first, there needs to be more materials that are certified to be part of drinking water systems, for example, roofing materials. In the past, there's just been one roofing material that's actually certified by NSF to be part of a drinking water system. That doesn't mean there's materials that are not capable of being part of such a system, but rather that the certification needs to happen, and so that they're at the designer's fingertips instead of the designer having to search or get things certified just to be part of the project, for example. Another big hurdle is that if you're going to have a drinking water system, public water supply, you need to meet, and you need to basically be, have a permit to supply water. And there's a few different ways of addressing this. In the city of Santa Monica, it became a satellite of the city's permit to distribute potable water. In the case of the Bullitt Center, they had originally agreed to treat the water and then test the water and give those results weekly, right, to the public water supplier. Unfortunately, then that was put on hold. And so they're still waiting to get this regulatory piece worked out so they can supply potable water through rainwater. So it's definitely a big hurdle. Second, recycled water. So on the left, you see a wastewater treatment plant. And on the right, you see a gray water system supplying gray water to plants to grow produce, different things. So the point here is that not everything needs to be sent straight off to the wastewater treatment plant. Like I said, we have fit for purpose water, many different kinds of water, and thinking about how we can recycle water. And especially for a net zero water building, it's important to recycle water because we want to use that water multiple times to reduce the water demand on that building and to maximize the use of that rainwater or that sustainably managed well, right? And so here, some of the barriers, hurdles are that there's many different vocabularies about recycled water. And so water is tricky because it has not just building code and plumbing code, but it also has environmental code and it has public health code. And so across those different codes and across the local, state, and federal language, there are different definitions for gray water, for example. And so there needs to be consistency across the jurisdictions and the different agencies to understand, when I'm an architect on a project and I want to put in a recycled water system, that it's streamlined and clear who I need to talk to and how I meet those different code requirements. And there's been some interesting innovation here. For example, in California, they've broken out different kinds of water. And so they have gray water, which is like shower water. But they also have something they're calling dark gray water, which is our kitchen water, which is exposed to different kinds of bacteria. And so at least they're making clear the pathways for these different kinds of water systems to get permitted and what they have to do. Okay, so lastly, wastewater. This is my students' favorite topic to discuss, largely because we just don't think about where our wastewater goes and what happens to those biosolids. And so on the left, you see like a typical toilet. And on the right, you see what a composting toilet can look like. It doesn't need to necessarily look like what you think about when you think about a composting toilet, which is what you see at your favorite trailhead. These can actually be odorless, use just a few teaspoons of water per flush, and function having just a normal toilet experience. In terms of code, there are a few different issues. One is that a building that's in an urban area is required to hook into the sewer system. If it, because instead, so you're not allowed to have things like composting toilets as such, and not have a link to the sewer system. So projects have had to work with local officials to explain that they don't need that hook in and they don't need to pay for it. So figuring out like a code around composting toilet integration to urban areas would be really helpful. Another issue is the biosolids in the leachate as byproducts of the composting toilet. The biosolids need to be collected maybe once a year, the leachate every few months, according to those net zero water case studies. And so those can either be pasteurized on site and then used on site locally, or they can be taken off site. But clearer language and stipulation about what should be done with that is important. Okay, so in conclusion, I'm going to go back through the 4 paradigms and talk a little bit about what each of us can go home and do to be part of this urban water system transformation. And so first, we had this idea of average and extremes, right? Especially as designers, we can advocate for and design for systems that integrate and recognize our natural systems and work with our natural systems and our social systems, and have a built environment that has that adaptive capacity to respond to these shifts and changes. Second, centralized and decentralized. We all, work and live in the city and have the possibility to advocate for decentralized systems, integrating gray water and rainwater and these alternative water supplies, and being open to using alternative water supplies as well, which requires a bit of behavior change. Siloed versus collaborative. As citizens, we can advocate for these broader changes in our urban water system and work collaboratively across our cities. And then lastly, perhaps most importantly, is this point on technological innovation and social innovation, especially in the Southwest. We need to recognize that the way that we have our urban water system set up is just not sustainable, and that we need to make some changes and recognize the place in which we live. It is totally possible to have self-sufficient cities, that requires some behavior change, some perception change, and some expectations changes. And so being open to all of that. So with that, thank you for listening, and it's wonderful to be here with you today. Thanks. So I'll take any questions that people have. Yes.
Cities, for example,
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, I know Denver now allows for it, but yeah, Albuquerque, for example, still has that river compact issue. So, right. So there's places in the Southwest that really see the water falling in that location as belonging to the Colorado River in this wider system. And so they say, no, you can't retain it on site. I think talking to the water utility in Albuquerque, and even they want to push green infrastructure, but they can't shout it from the rooftops because they'll get in trouble with with those issues. I think it's integrating it locally. I think it's recognizing the that it's all part of the natural system, and in the sense that infiltrating water locally to groundwater is important for the river system. We're not doing it on this like gigantic scale. So these green infrastructure projects are really not impacting like a huge supply on the Colorado River. And another important point I just want to mention here, because I think which something that comes up often with the rainwater systems is that the rainwater is part of a holistic approach to net zero water, meaning we're not capturing rainwater and flushing it down the toilet or a drain and sending it outside our city to the wastewater treatment plant. On net zero water buildings, we're capturing the rainwater, we're using it another time in the building, and then we're infiltrating it locally. And so we're putting that water back in the same place that it fell. So yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, it comes up a lot. Yeah. Okay.
I'm an engineer.
Uh-huh.
Like you said, it's like
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
They're not going to sustain it without innovative development
Because of innovation. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So economic push is like this picture what's driving all these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Then I get the same fight on the engineering side.
Yeah.
And government, school management, all those things. So yeah, and so I guess like so the question, sorry, that's a lot of
Good points. Lots of good points in there. Yes, I totally agree. Yes. So, oh.
economics don't change. Although the drought is like a nice factor to help that out. But then where's the stuff that help make it successful? So we have a lot of long talks and visions, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen plants we've got them on the campus, cisterns that don't work because they're inside.
Yeah. Right.
And then,
Right.
and
Yeah. It's not worth our time to, yeah. Excellent points. Economists. I have worked with resource economists. I think it's a really, really, really important point because it really does come down to the price of water. I saw it with energy systems in terms of us moving to integrating photovoltaics, both the price of those systems coming down, but really the price of energy, making it such that there was a payback period and there was motivation, right? Right now, the cost of water, very low. Economists like to talk about scarcity pricing, that it should be priced for scarcity, like our current water price isn't actually capturing that value of that resource, especially in a place like Tucson. Water should be really expensive, highly valuable, but we keep it at a very low rate. So if you wanted to put in a rainwater to potable system, for example, on your house, so we've done the math on that paper, it's like a 50-year payback. You know, it's not there. No one's gonna do it because they want to save money. So I think it's everything. And when I worked as an architect, I saw this all the time. The clients are motivated by that payback period. And when there was a payback period, they got excited about integrating net zero energy and things like that because they can feel good about it, but they also know that they're not having to do much to, in terms of capital cost. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
climate change. So Seattle has a very small reservoir. And you have economics in Arizona.
Right.
So the question is, why would you upgrade a system to there's center structure distributed infrastructure made a lot less water. That's so the economics aren't changing, but you certainly have to. And but I totally agree. But my conviction is that there's going to be this water event where it's going to tip like it did with energy.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, exactly.
I would love to talk to you more about that.
Yeah. And it's different scales, I think, like to make the economic case at that larger city scale, and then how you go through and retrofit. Such a fascinating question for us as designers, how you retrofit a city and their water system. And then you're talking about, it sounds like more on a campus scale or a building scale. Yeah.
You just have the same organization, bigger organization. It's got all the hands that all actually which our campus has a lot of.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I would love to talk to you more, because I'm trying to break down some of these silos. I've gotten here at a very exciting time in the last 3 years. Campus really going through a renaissance,
Mm.
and it's awesome. I love it. But I'm running into a lot of silos here, whether it's like schedule, budget, or the quality. We're
Mhm.
gonna get it done on time, on schedule, get quality. And then we have like all these products. Or, just like, no, we're not gonna change, you know, how much information bring to the table, there's somebody that's, you know. So off, I can't be very crazy, but like, it's not gonna change, without them partner in this process. Now you've got a maintenance problem, everything's gonna look horrible, and then you say, well, see, I looked at those.
Mhm.
And so trying to break down this. And so that's where studies are awesome. It's good data. I'm not trying to discount it. But the reality is that a bunch of sometimes individual pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really important point and question. I think there's another question, and yeah, it's a big challenge. But this is watershed moments, there's how change happens, how change occurs, innovation occurs, lots of frustration before the innovation occurs, right? And getting everyone on board in that kind of larger universal sense of where we need to be headed together. Yes, yeah. Huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. 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 That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Before we get to that point. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. That's the grand motivator. Yeah. Yeah. So, right. Excellent point about thinking about, and water is the great unifier. I think it's a really great way we can teach our students about, that cross scale impact of our designs, aggregate effect of multiple buildings and things like that. So yeah. So the collective is really important. We see that in carbon systems too, right? And it's, what is the social value of carbon? We're having to make those cases, and we're having to figure out ways that carbon and water starts being valued in our economic system in a different way. It's really important, and it's an uphill battle, right? Yeah. Do you have a question? Okay. Uh-huh.
in the city.
Okay.
And I would just offer one encouragement to get back to the comment discussion.
Yeah.
We're beginning to see a very green premium in rents and
Mhm.
sales
Mm-hmm.
and water.
Yeah.
Power.
Mm-hmm.
So that's encouraging from the private sector. You're seeing customers, large and small, wanting to be in buildings that are intentionally creating sustainable
Mm-hmm.
enterprises. So a couple of examples in Charlotte, we have 2 buildings that we've recently sold, but they have, there's a large consumer of water in our commercial buildings is actually.
Uh-huh. Right. That's right.
10, 20x more than the sinks and toilets.
Mhm.
Is the evaporative cooling that's happening in the roofs.
Right.
And the makeup that's to keep us stable.
That's right. Yeah.
So we've been able to, a lot of these sites require de-water.
Mm-hmm.
You're cleaning contaminated.
Mm-hmm.
Most owners, the simplest thing to do is to clean that water and
Mm-hmm.
dump it.
Yeah.
Dump it. So,
Yeah. That's what normally happens.
we,
Yeah.
we created a system that collects that clean water
Mm-hmm.
and pumps it to the roof for makeup.
Mm-hmm.
To the tune of 7 to 10 million gallons.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So being able to tell those stories,
Mhm.
those are not like in development, that can be under a pretty small.
Mm-hmm. To connect those
Yeah.
two. Yeah.
All of a
Yeah.
sudden, you've got a story of customers that
Mm-hmm.
they can appreciate it, like there's a tangible output to
Mm-hmm.
compensate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun to offer that, because I know that there are some discouraging kind of headwinds.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to see a lot more cultural intelligence around this from the
Wonderful. Yeah. 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 And you see that in San Francisco too. Mm-hmm.
They're building. But the cooling load is 35%. And there's other, and I'll talk about this.
Mhm.
People use cooling tower building. And it's salty in the southwest. So
Mhm.
you expect to adapt. So it's like free. Yeah, it's free, and you can also use stormwater,
Mhm.
clean water. It's kind of a more of a system. And the last thing
Mhm.
I'll share, in the Pacific Northwest, they have a tropical salmon state. And they do water. But people know that they're there. And so the same service development, it's like 100 but it's become a market based religion. And so could there be
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
We're switching over our campus as well. Maybe not irrigation.
Mm.
But
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
and we're switching
Nice.
is that water that's going to go down.
Mhm. Yeah.
very broad terms, west of the city.
Mhm.
West of the city, scarcity. Pump water from the wastewater treatment plants, rivers, it maxed out their use of those rivers.
Mhm.
So now,
Mhm. And that's your reclaimed water. That's where you're getting it from. Yeah.
and so we're not generating. But, yeah, like, things like the toilets, the flushing.
Yeah.
Such a small percentage of overall water consumption. It's in the rounding error of our estimates. of how much
Yeah.
water.
Yeah, I mean, the landscape's a huge fit. So if you want to talk about like centralized system innovation, I mean, we are definitely talking about direct potable reuse. When I talk to utilities in the Southwest, I mean, that is what we're doing. So if you don't know what direct potable reuse is, that means that we take the water in that goes into our sewer, clean it, and then send it right back into our pipes. We don't put it back in the environment. And that creates a huge efficiency. Of course, there's PFAS, pharmaceuticals, there's lots of concerns around that. And public, again, it's that social innovation. LA tried to do it decades ago. There's just been a lot of public pushback against it. But I do think we're getting to a watershed moment about direct potable reuse that will, or even indirect potable reuse. So yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, well, there's a few resources. I'm sure you guys have some as well. I mean, one place that I send my students to a lot is the International Living Futures website that has all these Living Building Challenge Net Zero Water case studies. I think it's really helpful because they are supporting, spreading the information, putting it out there. All these systems, water, it's connected to natural and social systems. So it's always going to be a bit place-based. So it's never like we're going to, I mean, you can get a packaged gray water system and things like that, but you still, I think for every design, you need to take into consideration local parameters. Yeah, there's lots of books out there. I don't know, do you guys have other favorite? Mm-hmm.
What you said about the new, I mean, it's exactly what you said, but it's highly particular surface.
Right.
It's not it's all, and the new thing is something.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I love that it was like more of a discussion than a Q&A. And I hear the passion and all of your excitement. So I'm feeling very optimistic, that we see the issues and that we want to be moving towards solutions. So anyone else? Yeah, and Blaine. Uh-huh. Right.
Make sure that the system works, we change about the one ball, we stay on, then definitely water.
Mm-hmm. Well, so yeah, it's kind of complicated and it's particular to each municipality and state, but it's basically at the building code official, and then how you're licensed to be able to distribute that water. These other projects have been working directly with the water utility. And so it's kind of based on goodwill and having other people excited to be part of this project, to be engaged. And so they have, and then the point about composting toilets, the Bullitt Center, their building manager is really important and has a lot of different skill sets than a normal building manager, composting toilets and water testing and things like that. But yeah, I think that one technology I do think could really be a game changer is this idea of in-pipe water quality testing. I know we have faculty working on it, but if you imagine that instead of what we have now, which is testing the water at the wastewater treatment plant, sending it out through pipes, having to have it chlorinated, and so you have an active agent, and then having some test points throughout the city, imagine that at any point you could test the water quality and the utility could get that information. And so you can have decentralized systems now because they can get real-time information about what that water quality is. I think that would completely change everything. Is that here? I know at the University of Arizona, I know the researchers are working on it. And so it's definitely a goal. I mean, I think it's coming. I think people see it as. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah. They're deploying it? Okay, well, there we go. I love this audience. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, like, so for their peace of mind, putting in some monitoring systems will be near real time, and we'll get alerts if some parameter goes out of the grade. Let's say there's a chlorine system.
Mm-hmm.
If water is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
have all this data
Mm-hmm.
and models. That's facilities management.
Mm-hmm.
And
We've all figured that.
uh-huh. And like I said, it's an awesome time. First, it's a total paradigm shift that's going on in the last 5 years. But we're really trying to get modernized. And well, we're not going to be able to tell you that. It's going to be close to the end where we can demonstrate and help you on the pilot systems. That's the vision we work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we have staff that have to go around and check the water buildings.
Mm-hmm.
What's the furthest?
That's right.
Get files in. That's a whole nother conversation.
We understand you've got lots of challenges in your job. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And civil engineering plans, not just architecture. All the plans are getting worse, but yet we're trying to move to a digital world where can't have this mistakes. Or maybe in digital, you find out, but then they're like, well, we're not set up to do that. So to do these things that we're talking about, we can actually monitor and use requires consulting and design industry to step it up.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I think as designers, I think sometimes we think of ourselves architects. We're into energy systems. I don't think we talk as much about water systems, and I think that's changing in our schools of architecture. I think we're taking more responsibility, and we need to, especially if some of the solutions are decentralized. That's totally our wheelhouse. So I'm gonna wrap it up. Oh, there's a question. Okay. Is there indications of public resistance to net zero changes? How involved is it? Okay. Okay. Yes. Good question. So I know in Tucson, Arizona, how we currently have a net zero water ordinance that is under review by our mayor and our council. And what that's doing is basically saying whatever percentage your new development is that's not net zero. So to whoever made the case about, yeah, the cities can push developers, they have to pay. So if it's 25% and it's not net zero water, they're going to pay Tucson Water, and then Tucson Water is going to take that money and implement to support wider conservation and so technological innovation integration. So that's something that's really exciting. I think I do think people in the Southwest are ready for this. I think we've got it. I think we know that we need to, that changes are necessary. So is there public resistance? I guess we'll see when that water ordinance comes out, how much resistance there is. But I think policies like that have a lot of room, like I was saying, like a performance-based code rather than prescriptive. If you can choose your own pathway as a developer, you know, like the performance that you need to hit, but you can figure out whatever systems that you need to implement. I think that's a really good way to go forward, in a way that people still are less resistant and feel still a lot of agency in the process. So I don't know if there's resistance to net zero here in Charlotte, but maybe we'll hear about that later. Should we wrap up, or yeah? Oh yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you guys.